Hi, this is my lecture to accompany my PowerPoint on Descartes' first meditation. Well, first, I'd like to talk about his other book, The Discourse on Method. A discussion on method. And the background, very, very rough sketch of the time frame, the social context in which Descartes wrote both The Discourse on Method and his book, Meditations on First Philosophy. This was a time, the Renaissance period, the dawn of the modern era, the rebirth of the Renaissance, rebirth of the classical era in Greek and Rome with philosophy and science and arts and humanities and all of those things. The beginning of the separation between science and religion. Western Europe had been dominated by the Catholic Church for 1.5 millennia, roughly, a little longer than that. And so you have the dawn of science, scientists like Galileo and others who are proving hypotheses about the physical world that sort of contradict generally accepted foundational beliefs that came out of Christianity, like the creation story and the idea that God created the earth in the middle of the universe and everything else outside of the earth revolves around the earth because the earth is in the center. The geocentric model, the earth-centered model, where the moon, the sun, the stars, the planets, they all revolve around the earth because God made the earth in the center of his creation and put mankind in the center of the earth, so to speak, because creation was all about mankind. Right? So you've got scientists like Galileo with his telescope showing that, wait, you can see the moons of Jupiter revolving around Jupiter. They're not revolving around the Earth. They're revolving around Jupiter, right? And so you've got the challenges to these biblical conceptions on the one hand, the laws of motion of people like Galileo and, all sorts of modern science where things are being proven that are displacing superstitious beliefs and folklore and all sorts of kind of ground level foundational beliefs and alleged truths that go back, to the ancient Greeks about the geocentric model and things like that. And they're all falling apart and being replaced by scientific beliefs, which are then indirectly challenging the validity of the biblical worldview altogether. So you've got that, and you've got tradition and folklore and wives' tales and opinions and beliefs and mathematics. So you've got all sorts of things, really good science and math on the one hand, and then all this other not so good epistemology, so to speak, theories of knowledge or ways of treating things that as if they're knowledge when they're not, all blended together in a big ball of confusion and a big web. So Descartes saw it as a project of his to try to wipe away all mere opinions and beliefs and differentiate them from true knowledge, right? So that he could identify what's good and right about mathematics and science and put that on firm philosophical or epistemological foundational grounds, right, upon which science could then stand and grow and build and keep that distinct from superstition and pseudoscience and mere opinion and dogma and traditions of the church and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's the intellectual climate, almost like a climate of fake news, right? And then good news suddenly. So there's a parallel there with our modern era, contemporary situation. Descartes had an excellent education in a Jesuit college. I believe it was in a town in France called La Fleche, which was like kind of the intellectual center of his era at the time. think even another famous philosopher, David Hume, that was a librarian studying all of his work on history at that library, and recently found out that he may have come across Buddhist philosophy there. Because you see, what a coincidence that David Hume, great philosopher that we will study at some point in this course, had a lot of ideas that resemble Buddhist ideas. All right, so in any event, I digress. I apologize for that. So Descartes wanted to kind of analyze what mathematicians do, because they can prove that this is equal to that, the equation, the equal sign, the equation, right? The equals, equate, this equates with that, equations, things that show how this equates with that, right? Mathematicians can prove their equations, right? So what is it that they do right, and how do they do it right? And he analyzed that because he knew that that was correct. And he figured something like that kind of reasoning must be going on in science, and he wanted to, give it, like, just extract this is what works, right? So let's extract epistemological working principles or ground level principles. Like, what are the basic principles and techniques that mathematicians employ? What's the epistemology that the mathematicians use? Let's see if we can replicate that generally and use it across the board for philosophy in general. And philosophy at the time was still considered the tree of all knowledge. Like every other branch of knowledge is a branch of philosophy. Philosophy of nature, philosophy of biology, philosophy of life, philosophy of you name it, right? So philosophy in Descartes' mind is the tree of knowledge, right? So how do we kind of reconstruct the tree of knowledge and put it on a firm footing? So he wrote this book, The Discourse, kind of analytic discussion using this kind of analytic reasoning that I've demonstrated in some previous lectures to figure out what the mathematicians do right, extract those principles, identify them, name them, right? And this would be kind of like a new rule book for modern scientific and modern philosophical thinking, right? So he came up with 4 principles of method. The first is the method of doubt. So if some belief or equation X can be doubted at all, let's just say, right? And I will simplify that and say that if you can doubt something, then you're not certain about it. Then X is not knowledge. Because knowledge, and this is a simplification, but knowledge is certainty. Right? So a mathematician, if they can't prove an equation, they won't claim to know it. They have to be able to prove it. Once you prove it, then you're certain of it. Right? So if you can be uncertain of it, you haven't proved it. That's another way of putting it. But I like to contrast certainty and uncertainty. Knowledge is certain and doubt is uncertain. If I know X equals Y, let's just say, I'm certain of it. Why am I certain? Because I've proven it in mathematics, let's just say. If I'm uncertain that the left side of the equation is equal to the right side of the equation for whatever reason, it's because I haven't proven it. I don't know it, right? So if I'm uncertain, I can doubt that it's true. So doubt and uncertainty are almost the same thing. If you're doubting something, you're uncertain about it. Right? And if you have knowledge, then you're certain. This is, I think, maybe the most important principle of method that Descartes plucked out of analyzing. I think that's how he got his knowledge of these principles, by looking at what mathematicians do. Right? So we'll see why this is the most important thing. Okay? Shortly, I'll hold off on that for now. Second method is the method of analysis, and these are on the slides. There's almost nothing that I'm saying here, or rather, there's nothing on the slide that I'm not saying here. So if you don't have access to the slides, that's okay. But if you're in the class and you want to review, you can go back and look at the slides and probably remember everything that I'm saying, even without having to listen to this lecture again. right? So this is my compromise for future people who get their hands on this YouTube video or something and they don't have access to the PowerPoint, or students who do. Okay, so the method of analysis, I'm simplifying this. Descartes said a lot more complicated things about all four of these methods, but one way of thinking about the method of analysis is to think of an equation that has, let's just say, two numbers being added together inside parentheses, right, like 2 plus 3, and then outside the parentheses, right, either in front of them or after them with a superscripted number, right? Suppose there's a 2 in front of them, right, or 2 after them, 2 to the second power, right? Well, when it comes to 2, it's pretty simple, right? But the first, like this is a simple equation, right? The first thing that you do is break it down into parts, right? So sorry, my ping there just distracted me, reading my little text message that flipped by my screen. If 2 plus 3 is inside the parentheses, then you add them together first. That's 5. And then you take the 2 in front of the parentheses and you say, that 2 means to double whatever the value is inside the parentheses. So 2 times 5 is 10. Or 2 5s, 5 plus 5 is 10, right? So, whereas if there's a little 2 raised up after the closing parenthesis, that means to the second power, then you still go at first inside the parentheses and you go 2 plus 3 is 5. But then the superscripted, as we call it, the little 2 means to the second power, means you multiply the thing inside the parentheses by itself, right? So 5 times 5 is 25, right? So you break a problem down into the smallest parts, right? And that's the way that you work on solving it. Now, step 3 is more complicated than this. It's called the method of synthesis. And it's probably a little bit distortive of me to simplify it this much. But what you might want to say is that when you got the 2 plus 3 inside the parentheses and you add them together, right? And then you take the number outside, whether it's in front or afterwards, and you factor that in, right? And you do the addition or the multiplication, right? Then you're putting the parts together. You're uniting, you're synthesizing, right? And like I said, the method of synthesis is a little bit more complicated than that, but you could just remember it. It's enough to think of it that way. You break a problem down into its parts, and then you might want to see, how do all the parts fit together? How do they unite to create the whole, right? Okay, and then just know that that's somewhat of an oversimplification. But it's good enough for our present purposes. And then the fourth step is what he calls the method of review, which in mathematics is very simple. Check your work. Do it twice. Or make sure you didn't make a mistake. Or use a technique. So if you did addition, the way that you check addition is with subtraction. If 2 plus 3 equals 5, the way you can prove that is if 5 minus either one of those numbers gives you the other number. So 5 minus 2 is 3, and 5 minus 3 is 2. So 2 plus 3 equals 5, right? That's checking your work. You check that, and then you check with the number 2 in front of or after the parentheses, right? You check your work. So the check for multiplication is division, and vice versa. The check for subtraction is addition, and vice versa, right? So you just go over and make sure you didn't make a mistake. All right, so those are the 4 methods. And then what I think happens is in the his other book, Meditations on First Philosophy, what he tries to do, particularly, well, begins in Meditation 1, is to apply those principles of method, right? And to go through, you might want to say, all of the beliefs that he inherited from the previous generation, right? And expose them to some kind of thorough analysis based on those 4 principles so that he could sort out the things that we know from the things that we doubt or that we're uncertain of, right? So just think about it. in a way, we suppose you're like him. We are now. He's got like fake news, you've got alleged facts and fake facts and all this kind of confusion going on. It was similar in his day, but at least he knew math and science were good, right? But what he did, and what everyone should do at some point in their lives, is have a meditation, not with the eyes closed and, om, this kind of thing. Om. Not that kind of meditation, although those are great, and I do them all the time. It's my favorite form of philosophical activity. But when Descartes said meditations on first philosophy, by the way, we're on the second slide here, which says first meditation, 1 out of 6. He meant it in the simple sense of reflections, contemplating, thinking, the way Aristotle thought about basic concepts like same and different, and what makes a thing identical to itself, and all kinds of, simple, brilliant ideas that Aristotle had, like, if I can perceive something with 2 different sense organs, then one of them verifies the other. And so then that's reason to think that what I've perceived is not merely some kind of a, noise or an illusion or an effect of my own equipment, right? The size and the shape, I can see and feel them, right? That kind of thing. So that was Aristotle's way of just analyzing and thinking and separating things and then putting them back together again, right? You see this kind of thinking about the use of same and different are crucial keys that are involved in, I think, almost all knowledge. Same and different. So every one of us is, if you're not already completely enlightened, right? Especially if this is your first exposure to like deep philosophical thinking, you might want to pause and realize that you've inherited from your society a vast program of beliefs. Right? You might want to think when you were born as a baby, you were something close to a blank slate. You had no beliefs. And you learned language and concepts and all the beliefs of all the people around you, and you have all these worldviews now. It's as if over the course of time, you got a gradual cultural download, like when you download a program onto a brand new computer, right? Your empty mind was like a brand new computer, and by now you've gotten the full cultural download, the full set of beliefs, language, the rules, the principles, the values, all that stuff. That's all in your head. And what Descartes is trying to do is say, let me re-examine all of that. Because blended together in this mess is knowledge, which is certain, and mere belief and opinion and superstition and hearsay and all kinds of folk tales and wives' tales and folklore and myths and, probably an awful lot of fiction and error. It's all blended together. And if I can't differentiate between it, then all of it is useless. It's kind of like if half of what somebody says is lies, almost all of what they say can't be trusted. Right? There's a saying in the law that's juries get instructed. It's a Latin phrase: falsus in unum, falsity in one; falsus in omni, false in all. In other words, if someone on the witness stand was proven to have lied once, then you can't trust anything that they say, right? So if some of your beliefs are known by you to be posing as knowledge, but they're not really knowledge, and you can't tell the difference, well, then all of your beliefs are suspicious. And it would be good for you to sit down and revisit everything that you believe and have this experience meditating on what your first principles of philosophy should be, right? Like those 4 principles of method, right? You should use something like that to review all of your beliefs and sort them out and clean up your epistemological room, so to speak. Now I'm quoting Jordan Peterson, the guy, psychologist from Canada who's become a kind of hit, who says, clean up your room. That's one of his principles of method, so to speak. But yeah, you've got to clean up this room. Never mind cleaning up your bedroom. Philosophically, you've got to clean up this room. And that's what Descartes is trying to do in the Meditations on First Philosophy. He's applying the principles of method to his own beliefs. And in the first meditation, he does it in a very natural way, where he tries to just sort of tell you how he's thinking about how he's come to have the beliefs that he's had, how he's noticed that they're unreliable, and how he starts to reason his way through how he could figure out a way to clean up his mental room, so to speak, right? And he, like I said, he walks you through his own reasoning so that when you're reading Descartes' first meditation, you can and should be thinking to yourself, I've had that experience. I've discovered that some of my beliefs were false. I know what that feeling is like. Maybe I ignored it. I need to pay attention to it because it means it's significant. If my mental room is not clean, I've got nonsense blended in together with sense. At some point in your philosophical life, you have to become philosophically mature and awaken to the fact that this is a mess and clean it up, right? Or wake up, so to speak. So I have it on my slide. First thing it says, apply the method of doubt. And Descartes talks about this in a very casual way when he says, bullet, many beliefs turned out to have been wrong, right? Come to realize that some of my past experiences and sense perceptions and whatnot have been in error, right? Therefore, other beliefs may be faulty or doubted, right? If a belief can be doubted, that means it's uncertain, it's not knowledge, right? So that's the method of doubt. He uses it as a sword, right? Let me try to find out which ones of my beliefs I can doubt. If I can doubt them, I obviously don't know them, then I'm going to cut them out or wipe them off. He uses this metaphor of the blank slate, like a child is born, like a blank blackboard, and all the beliefs get written on there. It was originally a blank slate. He wants to erase anything that doesn't belong in there, right? Anything that can be doubted. But then, this is the last bullet under the first item, apply the method of doubt, which says there are too many beliefs to test individually. So this is Descartes applying the method of analysis, right? Which leads to his recognition that there's too many beliefs in there to try to doubt each one of them one at a time. That would take forever. That could never be accomplished. So then the second big bullet there is apply the method of analysis. How do I break down the problem of all my beliefs? Maybe I break them into categories. If I can divide my beliefs into categories, I suppose there were 5 categories of belief. Then what I could do is take a category of belief and think about what's the foundational assumption on which all the beliefs in that category rest. Like suppose it was that I had a whole category of my beliefs that came from newspapers, right? Or came from YouTube videos, right? Then I could say to myself, well, are YouTube videos actual live film footage of unrehearsed events with non-actors? Or could they be edited in the way that movies are made, right? And then you realize, well, yeah, they can be edited. So if I saw a video of a guy walking on water and there were people around him trying to test and show and put their hand through the water around where he was. Chris Angel, I think is his name. In fact, a student put that video of ours up on our class Facebook page so we could all see it because he really believed it was true. So like, once you realize that, well, in the same way that movies are made that show Spider-Man doing things, Superman and all this kind of stuff, a YouTube video could be made using the same kind of technology, and therefore you just can't believe automatically anything just because you saw it in a YouTube video or because you read it in a newspaper, right? Because there are biased newspapers, ideologically bent newspapers or whatever it is. So the point is, you look at what's the foundational, there's an assumption for every category of belief that if that assumption can be doubted, then all the beliefs in that category suddenly no longer count as knowledge because they all collapse. That's the foundation. If you pluck out the foundation, right, like take the first floor out of a big building, the whole building collapses, right? So And then whatever's left, if he goes through this process and knocks down all the foundations for categories of beliefs that can be doubted, if there's anything left that can't be doubted, then that will be the foundation, the first principles of the new metaphysics and epistemology of science and mathematics and philosophy, something that can't be doubted, right? And then we'll build up on there. What can we build up on there? So his whole approach is called foundationalism. He's going to eliminate bad foundations and see if there's a solid foundation, right? So apply the method of analysis, divide beliefs into categories, right? This is the second bullet under the second half of the slide, right? Showing the method of analysis, where he says, well, I realize that most of my beliefs have come to me through my senses. I've either seen things myself, or I read them, or I heard them, or I smelt them, or I tasted them, or I touched them. I know that, that's my hand because I'm touching it, and so on. So then he says, and I know that I've had sensory errors, right? Then the question is, can I doubt all of my sensory experiences because I've had some sensory errors, right? If the whole category of sensory beliefs is doubtful, then none of my sensory beliefs count as knowledge. And like most of my beliefs came to me through my senses. So for Descartes, it turns out there's really only like two categories of beliefs, right? One, beliefs that came to us through our senses, and two, beliefs that didn't come to us through our senses, but that came to us through reasoning alone, right? I mean, that's almost all we have is our perceptions and then how we think about them, how we analyze them. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next slide where we're going to look at the arguments that he actually makes about these things. So he wants to first target the senses because that's where that's the analysis, break it down into the categories. Okay, most of my alleged knowledge came to me through my senses. Let me try and rip out the foundation of my sensory knowledge. Can I doubt that? I either can or I can't. I mean, if I can doubt it, then I don't know it. So I shouldn't be afraid. If I care about the truth, then I'm going to look at that foundation and say, you know what? Either I can or I can't doubt it. If I can doubt it, then I can't really say that I know my sensory beliefs. So that's what he tries to do. So he has, on this slide, it says applied doubt, the method of doubt, 3 skeptical arguments. 3 arguments aimed at developing skepticism, which is doubt. I'm uncertain about that, or I'm skeptical, meaning I don't know it, right? I'm agnostic about it or something like that. Agnostic, the A means not, and gnostic means knowing. All right, it comes from the Greek word gnosis, which is G-N-O, the G is silent, and K-N-O-W in English, the K is silent. And both of them come from the Sanskrit jnana, G-N-A-N-A, jnana, which is also with the silent G. I can't help myself when it comes to the roots of words. But, so not knowing. Right? Remember, if I don't know it, it's not knowledge. If I can doubt it, I don't know it. I'm uncertain about it, right? So 3 arguments. The first 2 target the senses, and then the third argument targets our reasoning abilities, right? So this is from the first meditation. There are 6 meditations, and I encourage you. In my Dropbox, I have just meditation 1, but all 6 of them are also in there. In a PDF, and you could read them all. And they're not that long, and they're really fascinating, especially number 2, which we're not going to do. Oddly enough, a lot of professors won't do number 1 without doing number 2. Maybe I'll mention something about it very briefly when we get to it, when we finish meditation 1. But the first argument capitalizes on what we already mentioned, that it's called the argument number 1, the argument from past error. Right? And then the second argument is called the dream argument. The third argument is called the evil demon argument. So the argument number 1, the argument from past error, has 2 premises, A and B, and then a conclusion, C. So let me remind you, conclusion is what you believe, and your premises are your reasons why you believe it. What do you believe, and why do you believe that? Okay, but we want to look at the premises first, because it should be the case that your data, your observations, lead you to conclude what you conclude and not the other way around. Because then if you have, this is what I believe, now let me find some reasons to believe it, right? That's a kind of backward engineering. where you're really just defending the beliefs that you have rather than asking, what facts do I have? Those are my premises. Given those facts, what conclusion should I draw? That's being more open-minded. Otherwise, you're being kind of biased, right? Confirmation bias, by the way, confirmation bias is the name of the fallacy of reasoning. A fallacy is a logical error, where you have the beliefs that you already like kind of dogmatically hold, right? And then you just go looking for reasons that support them, right? And you see something that supports your belief, it confirms your belief. That's confirmation. But we're biased in the way that we do that. We tend to notice the things that support our views, and we tend to not see or ignore or make light of or laugh at or dismiss or try to ridicule those things that go against what we believe, right? And we don't keep track of it the way we keep track of what confirms it. So we go, I've got a lot of evidence that supports my view, and there's very little that doesn't because I've dismissed it, I haven't paid attention to it, I've mocked it, ridiculed it, I've resisted it in so many ways. I'm biased in the way I go about confirming my beliefs. That's confirmation bias. All right, so philosophy, you might want to say one of the great things about philosophy is that if you really get it, it'll really help you to work on reducing the extent to which you fall for your own confirmation bias. And we're all really prone to it, right? Myself included. Okay, so premise A, the senses have deceived me. Descartes gives some examples of this throughout the Meditations. I'll give you a classic one that goes back to Plato. When Plato said, when you put a knife into water, let's just say that this is the water level, when you put the knife in, it looks like it's going that way, even though up here it's going this way, but underneath it's going the other way, right? It kind of looks crooked. This is an illusion, right? That's one. Another one, I think Descartes uses this example as a distant tower. It looks like it has a certain shape because it's far away, and then when you get close up, you see that it's different. Like you might think that it's a weather vane, but then when you get close up, it turns out to be a crucifix or whatever, vice versa, right? Something that happens to all of us, I'm sure it's happened to you, is you think you see somebody you know, and you go to say hello to them, and if you're fortunate, you get to realize that it's not them before you say, hi, Frank, or something like that, and the guy turns around and you go, oh, sorry, you look like someone I know, right? We've all had these kinds of mistakes. Sensory errors. Mirages are all sensory illusions, but we think we see something on closer analysis. That's not what it is. In Hindu philosophy or Indian and Buddhist philosophy, there's a story about a classic example is the snake that you see in the dark and it frightens you, and then you put the light on and it's just a coiled rope, right? And so on. One of the other classic illusions in Hinduism and Buddhism is if you spin a torch really fast at night, it'll look like a perfect circle of light, but it's not. If you just did it slowly, you would see it's not a circle. It's a light moving in the shape of a circle fast enough so that all you see is the circle, right? So look, our senses deceive us, and they've done it many times. That's premise A. I think that's undeniable. Not only that, it's not like you might want to say, well, it's not my senses, it's my interpretation of them. Maybe, maybe not. Look, what about that popular thing a year or two ago where there was the dress gold or was it blue or whatever, was white, these kinds of optical illusions where our senses, we're perceiving it the wrong way, right? We say they have two different cubes next to each other, gray and black or whatever, and then there's a white cube, and the way they place them makes some of them look darker than other ones, but then when you take all the other ones away, you see that those two gray cubes are the exact same shade, right? But because of what they're placed next to, you see them as being one darker than the other, but they're not, right? So, we can prove that we're all prone to these kinds of sensory errors, right? Second premise is a kind of principle of survival. It's a practical and logical principle. Premise B, I shouldn't entirely trust what's deceived me, right? So if somebody's lied to you, right, should you completely trust everything that they say after that it's been proven to you that they lied to you? right? This is just common sense. The answer is no, all right? So then the conclusion, let me rehearse the premises for you, and then you tell me if you can see what the conclusion is. So suppose the premises were all A's are B's, first premise. Second premise, all B's are C's. What could you conclude? Well, pause it if you need to think about it, and then come back. All A's are B's, all B's are C's. Well, it follows logically that all A's are B's, right? And if A is greater than B, and B is greater than C, what follows logically? Pause it, think about it. A is greater than B, and B is greater than C. It follows logically, therefore, conclusion, A is greater than C, right? So this is what we mean by an argument with logical reasoning. The premises lead logically to the conclusion, then that's good logic, right? So here's Descartes' argument again, premise A. My senses have deceived me. Premise B, I shouldn't entirely trust anything that's ever deceived me. Therefore, conclusion, C. Pause, think about it, what follows? Come back, okay. My senses have deceived me. I shouldn't trust entirely anything that's ever deceived me. Conclusion, therefore I shouldn't entirely trust my senses. It's a perfectly logical argument, right? Now Descartes could have stopped right there, but then he employs the method of review. He says, wait a second. Just because my senses have deceived me, that doesn't seem like those kinds of examples, they don't seem representative enough of my senses. There's something peculiar about them that's not present in the cases when my senses don't seem to be deceiving me, right? Like an optical illusion or something that's far away, or a face of a person that resembles my friend. Well, if he didn't resemble my friend, I wouldn't confuse him with my friend, right? And if that crucifix didn't look like a weather vane, I wouldn't have confused it with a weather vane. So a lot of times the reasons why I confuse things with my senses is because they closely resemble each other. They're not sufficiently distinct or different from each other, or they're not clear enough. I don't have a good enough view of them, right? So, but when things are close up and they're clear and they're distinct, like there's no way I'm going to confuse a banana with a watermelon, right? But I might confuse like a big tangerine with a small orange or something like that, right? Because it's hard to tell them apart. They look alike, they're not distinct. The difference between them is not clear, right? Or if they were far away, they could be a pile of big tangerines and little oranges all blended together, and it'll look like a pile of tangerines or a pile of oranges, right? So the distinction between them is not clear. So he says, so I can attribute all of the errors that my senses have come up with to things that are neither clear nor distinct. And then I can't generalize from that to all of my sensory experiences, because those sensory experiences of mine that are clear and distinct, I can't even doubt those. Like, these are my hands, right? This is my nose. Well, I'm speaking to you right now, right? So then he says, well, okay. So the argument number one, the argument from past error, meaning it's from the premise about past errors that I conclude that I shouldn't trust my senses, or that I don't know sensory things, right? Philosophers will name arguments, the argument from this premise or from that premise. So the argument from past error is not strong enough to justify me doubting that these are my hands, that things that are clear and distinct, even though that they involve my senses, right? So to do that, I need a stronger argument. Pardon me. So now, Descartes says, well, wait a second, let's review this again. Aren't there some kinds of other sensory experiences that are clear and distinct, but that are still deceive me? Right? This is applying review again. Okay, that equation worked, but does that equation apply to the problem that it was brought in to try to generate doubt for, right? Review the big picture, right? Just review the narrow picture, but review the big picture, right? And then he says, well, wait a second. Every night when I dream and I think that I'm holding my hands out and strangling someone or doing whatever it is that I think that I'm doing in my dream, I see my hands clearly and distinctly, and I feel them, or whatever it is. It's clear. A lot of it is clear and distinct, but it's a complete hallucination. He says, I think that I'm sitting by the fireplace in my purple gown reading a book, or whatever his example was, right? But really I'm lying naked in the sheets in my bed, snoring, right? This is a whole reality that's clear and distinct, but totally false, right? So next slide shows number two, argument number two, the dream argument, right? So when we put, like philosophers will read somebody like Descartes who's just reasoning in the way I was just reasoning. In fact, even in a more sort of casual conversational tone, reflecting on how he, went through this kind of thinking and then that, and then he realized this and that. We try to pluck out what we see as the premises and the conclusion and put them in argument form, right? Because he doesn't lay them out and say, oh, premise one, premise two, three, conclusion, right? But for me to help you to understand the arguments, I should put them in argument form. And that's what we do, because that's what he was really trying to convey, but in a way where anybody could follow it, even if they weren't familiar with the terminology of premises and conclusions and arguments, because he thinks anybody who's intelligent and who reviews their belief set, applying principles like doubt and analysis and whatnot, should be able to do all of this. Okay, so argument two, dream argument, premise A. Dreams may be radically deceptive. And I emphasize the word radically because you could dream that you killed somebody, or that the police are chasing you and they caught you and they put you in jail, or whatever it is. None of it happened. You were dreaming. It's a completely hallucinated reality, right? So that's you're being radically deceived. That's not like, oh, I thought you were my friend. You look so much like a guy I know. Because there is that resemblance, right? That's a little bit of deception from your senses. But to invent an entire reality of things that you see, smell, hear, taste, and touch, that's radically deceptive, like tremendously deceptive, right? And I'm sure that there's nobody on earth watching this video who has never awakened from a dream and been either very relieved to find out that that was only a dream, or very disappointed to find out that that was a dream. Oh, I thought I finally... All right, back to work. Right? I'm sorry, but it happens to everybody. In fact, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but we have a thing called false awakenings, which you had, that was a movie that highlighted those, was the movie Inception, where you're dreaming and then you wake up and you go about your business, you make your coffee, this, that, and then you wake up again. Then you realize that the first wake up was just a dream. You dreamt that you woke up, right? And sometimes that happens again, or even again. I think the most I've had was 3 false wake ups, which is a lot. I think when I woke up that day, really woke up, I assume, I don't know, maybe I'm still stuck in that dream, but once that happened to me, I was like, well, forget it, whatever, who cares? Just, come on. I hope that never happens to you, because that's really even much more unsettling than just talking about it. All right, so that's A, premise A. Argument 2, premise A. Dreams may be radically deceptive. Premise B. Dream states and waking states are relevantly similar. Now, they're similar and different in different ways, but there's one way in which they are relevantly similar and, flip side, relevantly dissimilar, right? Which is the key part for this argument. So here's what I think it is. Any experience that you could have when you're awake, assuming for the sake of the argument that you know that you're awake, is something you could dream having. Because anything that could happen to you when you're awake is physically possible. So if it's physically possible, then it's psychologically possible for you to dream it, right? Because you could just remember it or construct it somehow. It's a possible dream that you could have. But it's not the case that any dream experience that you can conjure up in your dreaming mind's imagination is one that you could have when you're awake, because impossible things happen when you're dreaming, right? You're talking to people that you, in your waking life, you know are dead, but in the dream life, it's as if you never realized that they died. Or you can go from the bedroom in your childhood apartment, walk through the foyer, down the hall, and go into the living room in your apartment that you have now in another state or something like that, right? You know, you can kind of violate laws of time and space and travel and all sorts of things. You can fly. There's all sorts of things that you can experience in the dream state that are physically impossible. So you can't, it's not the case that anything that you can dream is something that you could experience when you're awake, right? Although it is the case that any waking experience that you could possibly have is one that you could theoretically be dreaming that you're having. Now, what follows from that? Well, you can know that you're dreaming. Sometimes it happens that something happens in your dream experience and you realize, wait a second, that person is dead, right? Or something like that. This must be a dream. That's rare, but it could be that, or it could be anything else. Or I'm flying. That can't happen in real life, but or whatever, for whatever reason, whatever trigger. And there are people who practice techniques to help them realize that they're dreaming, right? Dream control. Sometimes you realize because of the logic, this is not possible. I must be dreaming. Right? So you can know sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it happens, and we're almost never in control of how or why it happened, except maybe some of those people who practice those techniques. But so you can sometimes know that you're dreaming. And we call that lucid dreaming. Lucid, really clear. Luce, the light. It's light. It's so bright, and so real that it's got infused with a kind of light of reality. Something becomes very clear when you're in one of those kind of lucid dreams. We're going to have really lucid dreams that don't involve you knowing that you're awake. It's just the dream is so real that it's greater than reality, but you don't realize you're dreaming. Or you could have lucid dreams in the sense where you know that you're dreaming. Most people who use the terminology lucid dreaming are only talking about the kind where you know that you're dreaming. But this other kind of lucid dreaming where you don't know that you're dreaming, but your experience is so real that it's greater than your waking reality. I think and it's lucid. It's extremely clear and bright in a way, kind of bright with reality. So I think it's okay, even though the people who specialize in lucid dreaming, right, wouldn't use the term the way I'm using it. It can be either of those things. But so the point is, Descartes put it this way: there's no surefire sign, like pinching my skin. No surefire, quote, no surefire sign that I'm awake. There are surefire signs that you're dreaming. If you realize that what you're doing is impossible, then you can conclude that you're dreaming or you're in a hallucination of some sort. Whether you're asleep or on drugs doesn't matter. But that you're not awake, you could just say, right? There's surefire proof that you're not awake, but there's no surefire proof that you are awake, right? That's the relevant part. Dreams and waking states are relevantly similar, right? Well, I should say relevantly similar, and again, relevantly dissimilar. They are dissimilar in this one way, but that's a way that only helps the argument. They are relevantly similar in being what the first premise says that they are, radically deceptive. Because if you can't prove, this is a way of justifying premise B, if you can't prove that you're awake, and then you can't differentiate between waking and dreaming, because any waking state that you think you have could be one that you're dreaming. and dream states are radically deceptive, then for all you know, your alleged waking states are equally radically deceptive. And that's the conclusion, C. Thus, waking states may be radically deceptive, right? So that's what's relevantly similar about them. If you can't tell the difference between A and B, and A has property X, well, B might also have property X, right? So if you can't prove that you're in state B and that state B is different from state A, right, waking and dreaming, and state A has the property of being radically deceptive, then state B, the waking state, may also be radically deceptive, right? So this is a very strong argument. And Descartes thinks that the implications, which are listed on the slide, are mind-boggling. First of all, unlike the first argument, the argument from past error, which couldn't generalize to all sensory beliefs, but only to things that were not clear and distinct, like my own hands, right? Things that are unclear and indistinct, the second argument can generalize to all sensory knowledge. Think about it. If you can't prove that you're awake, and this is Nagel made this point, right? If you can't prove that you're in a body with a brain with sense organs that they're physical and they're in physical contact with the world that's giving them the information that's going into your mind, right? If you can't prove that you have working senses, then the mental states that you think are being caused by working senses are doubtful. If you can't prove that you're awake, then you can't prove that you are in contact with actual physical senses that are accurately depicting a world outside of the senses. So that means that he's raised a doubt about all sensory beliefs. If you can't prove that you're awake, then all of your sensory beliefs are questionable. And what are some key sensory beliefs? I have a body. There's a physical world. Other people exist. We hinted at this when we were talking about Nagel, right? If I can't get outside of my mind to see if my mind and the world correspond with each other, how do I know that there's anyone else out there? If I can't compare with what other people see and experience, then I can't even get confirmation about my own mental states, right? Same thing here. If I can doubt all my sensory states, then I don't know that I even have a body or that there's a physical world or that other beings exist. It might all be part of the dreaming mind, right? And I didn't put this on the slide, but it's an important word. The name for the view that all I can ever know is my own mental states, and therefore I have no reason to believe anyone else exists, is called solipsism, from the word solo, which means only me. Solipsism, the belief that only I exist, right? It's not the same thing as being an egoist or a narcissist, but there's some similarities there. Now, Descartes is not saying only I exist, but what he's saying is, if I can doubt my senses, then I don't know. I believe, I might have decent reasons for believing that I have a body and I have senses and that other beings exist and there's a physical world and all that. But technically, I don't know it. It's like an equation in math that I haven't proven. It could be true, but it could be false. I only know something if I can prove it. Or if I can't even doubt it. It's so clear and distinct that I can't doubt it. Look, knowledge and doubt are opposites. Knowledge is certainty, and doubt is uncertainty. So if I can't prove something and I have some reason to doubt it, I'm uncertain about it, it's not knowledge, right? So I might have decent reasons for believing I have a body and senses and there's a physical world and all of you people exist, and I'm not just talking to myself here, but I don't know it. If Descartes' right in this argument, I don't know it. Let's move on to the next freaky slide, which is, pause for a moment, because we're going to transition. Remember, the first two arguments target the senses. The third argument targets things that don't come to us through our senses. So how we get from the dream argument to that is through review again. Descartes says, wait a second. Even though I'm dreaming, 2 plus 2 is still 4. Even if I'm dreaming, red is a color and a triangle has 3 sides. So there are certain simple things like colors and shapes and numbers and little logical things like equal signs. This equals that, right? That my arguments about the senses, they can't touch those because it doesn't matter whether I'm dreaming. You know, if I dream that I have 2 apples in my left hand and 2 red apples in my left hand and 1 red apple in my right hand, it still remains the case that I have 3 apples. Whether they're dream apples or real apples is irrelevant, but because 2 plus 1 equals 3, whether I'm dreaming or awake, right? And they're red, even if red is just a kind of mental red. There's a difference between red apples and green apples, right? So this is a kind of basic conceptual or logical or mathematical or definitional truths like a triangle is 3-sided, right? Whether I'm awake or asleep, a triangle has 3 sides. That's what it means to be a triangle, right? So, but can I doubt these? Can I doubt my own reasoning, the basic elements of thought and reason, basic concepts, right? Like roundness, square, red, equals, 1 equals 1. 1 does not equal 2, that sort of thing. So then Descartes tries to imagine, is there a way I could doubt those? He says, well, yeah, there is. What if there's no God? He gives some kind of reasoning very briefly. He just intimates this, touches on it. It's kind of suggestive. I haven't read the meditation in half a year or so. I should always read before I lecture on these things, but my memory's pretty good. So the details don't matter if it's fully in the first meditation or in the third. But I remember reading where he says something like, God is supposed to be all-knowing or, all-powerful, all-good, all-loving, a perfect being, so to speak. But I'm imperfect. I make mistakes, right? Sensory errors and things like that. Why would a perfect being make an imperfect being like me? So if an all-good, all-knowing, perfect being made a creature, it should be perfect, but I'm not perfect. So maybe the being that created me isn't perfect or isn't perfectly good. Now I'm adding to this to make some justification for the next move where he says something like, what if there was a being as powerful and as smart as God who just wasn't good, who created me? An evil genius or an evil demon. A cosmic being is just like God, only not good. So if an all-powerful, all-knowing, but not all-good being had control of my mind, it could deceive me. Even when it comes to things like A equals A, or a triangle has 3 sides, or 1 equals 1, or 1 does not equal 2. Right? I mean, if a being like God could control my every thought, he could put things on 2 sides of my equation and give me an illusion of equals, that sensation that they're equal when they're not, or just completely confuse me in ways that I can't even imagine. Now, because I know I'm imperfect and I've made mistakes, there's reason to think maybe a perfect being didn't make me. In which case, an imperfect being, who's got to be smarter than me, made me. If that's the case, it's possible that an evil demon deceives me in everything that I know, think, and experience. That's the evil demon argument's first premise. For all I know, It's possible that an evil demon deceives me in everything that I think and experience. That premise alone, together with the method of doubt, gives him the conclusion, thus, I know nothing. He's already eliminated sensory doubt, but he wouldn't even need the first two arguments if he just went right for this one, because this one knocks out the reasoning mind, let's just say, non-sensory beliefs, logical beliefs, conceptual beliefs, definitional beliefs, things like that, these simples, red is a color, an apple is an apple, all those things. The evil demon argument destroys all thinking and all sense perception, right? For all I know, an evil demon is completely deceiving me. Therefore, I can doubt everything. If the method of doubt is correct, then I can't know anything. I don't know anything, right? If I can doubt it, I don't know it. I can doubt everything, so I don't know anything. Now, one of the reasons I had you read Pollock, A Brain in a Vat, which is only about a page long, as a first reading, was so that you could already be mentally prepared. That's like primed you. It's like an appetizer for Descartes. But there's this other connection. If you never believed in any kind of supernatural beings whatsoever, God, demons, heaven, hell, afterlife, you're a physicalist or a materialist and you think it's all over when you die, then you might want to dismiss Descartes, because I don't believe in cosmic demons or God, so this is irrelevant to me. Say, okay, so instead of ED, the evil demon, Ed, let's put Biv in the place of Ed, the brain in a vat hypothesis, or SIM, S-I-M, the simulation hypothesis, where I'm a digital being in a simulated world. I'm an avatar, unbeknownst to myself. I only exist inside computer code as zeros and ones that have been designed so well that they replicate my consciousness so perfectly that there's no possible way I could differentiate between myself and a being that has a physical body, right? So that's where we are right now. This is skepticism. And there are philosophical skeptics who, for similar reasons, conclude that we don't know anything because we can doubt everything. We can imagine, the skeptic says, for any belief that you claim to know, I can imagine a way in which you came to that belief in an unreliable fashion. In other words, you were deceived into having the belief that you have this knowledge. And if I can create a credible hypothetical according to which you could seemingly reliably form that solid belief that you think you've proven to be true, but you were fooled, then skepticism wins. All right. So that's the last slide. I said I would talk a little bit about meditation too, and so now I will. Meditation 2 begins with Descartes saying, whoa, what a night, that kind of thing. And then immediately he goes to apply the method of review again. Like, did I miss anything? Is there no belief that's undoubtable? Well, the word that he used, which means the same thing as indubitable. Indubitable, unable to be doubted. And then he has a kind of eureka moment. And who knows if this just came to him on the second day of his meditations, or if he thought about it first and then wrote about it. Doesn't matter. It's very nice the way he lays it out. He says, wait a second. Even if I doubt something, in order for me to doubt it, I have to be thinking. Even if I'm deceived by something, to be deceived, I have to think something is the case when it's not. I have to believe something's true when it's false. But in any of these cases, believing, thinking that I know, doubting, being deceived, in all of those cases, I'm thinking. I'm a kind of thing that thinks. And whenever I am engaging in the activity of thinking, it follows logically that I must exist as a thing that thinks. Now, what's the name for a thing that thinks? A mind. I must exist as a mind. I might not know if I have a body or real sense organs or if there's a world, but I know that I exist as a mind. And I can prove it. Because to doubt it requires a thinking mind. To be deceived requires a thinking mind. Eureka! I think, therefore I am. I exist as a consciousness, as a mind. That's the first principle of Descartes' new epistemology and metaphysics. Mind is real. Mind is so real that it can't be doubted without contradicting itself. To doubt mind requires mind. I think, therefore I exist. Or mind is present, therefore mind is real, or something like that. And you can slice that in many different ways. Whenever I have consciousness of any kind, whether I'm on LSD or I had my fifth false awakening or I'm in the middle of a nightmare, I'm a mind. I have at least that kind of being, that kind of reality, that kind of existence. It might be purely subjective, if you recall Aristotle's distinction between objective and subjective. Right? It might be all in my mind. There might not be a world. I might not have a brain and a head and a body or sense organs. But I exist at least as a mind, and I can't be deceived unless I am a mind. To doubt that is to prove it. That's your mathematical proof. Right? You want to check the arithmetic? You do subtraction for your adding, or multiplication for your division, and so on. Right? So the proof of existence is guaranteed by the doubt of existence. Am I real? The teenager says the first time him and his hippie friends, wow, man. Hey, did you ever wonder, are we real? If Descartes was hanging out in the crowd, he would say, of course we are, man. We think, therefore we are. Right? Well, actually, he wouldn't say that. He would say, I think, therefore I am. Because he hasn't proven yet that you exist. Right? I think. I experience my consciousness. I never directly experience anyone else's consciousness. Which leads to what philosophers called the problem of other minds. How do I know that other minds exist? Well, I see bodies that look like mine with sense organs that seem like mine and behavior that resembles mine. And so one of the theories is that I simply infer by analogy, since I'm built this way and I act this way and I'm conscious, you're built this way and you act the same way, so I can infer by analogy you must be conscious. Right? That's another problem, because maybe a cyborg robot with synthetic skin and all that kind of stuff, or maybe even one biologically generated in a certain way to resemble us with cells and test tubes and everything, might not even be conscious. We call that kind of being a philosophical zombie. Not like the Walking Dead, the zombies, just like, you completely resemble and act just like a conscious being. But in theory, it might be possible that, synthetic artificially intelligent robots could do everything that we do, just the same exact ways that we do, without any consciousness whatsoever, right? So you see how one philosophical problem might lead into the next. But Descartes' conclusion in meditation 2 is that mind is real. That's the new foundation. And this is a kind of epistemological shift, which is similar to what's called the Copernican revolution, because Copernicus is the one around Descartes' time that said, no, the solar system and the galaxy does not revolve around the Earth. The Earth revolves around the sun. It's a complete figure ground shift. Oh, and by the way, I believe I read that the way that Copernicus figured that out and then tested it with the mathematics, and then Galileo's telescope proved it, is that he was in a boat on a stream. Have you ever been like on a bus or a train or in a car or whatever, where it feels like you're still and the world is moving by, and you get that kind of figure ground shift? Right? Of course, because you're not moving in the car is moving, right? That happened to him. And he had been struggling with why the math didn't work for the trajectories of the planets and the stars if they were revolving around the world, of the Earth. The math didn't work. But when he had that figure ground shift, he had a eureka moment. Light bulb went off, and he thought, maybe we have it backwards. And he was right, right? So what Descartes' shift was, it resembled that kind of epistemological figure ground shift for the modern age, the Enlightenment of the West, which prior to Descartes, I would imagine, is that external authorities like the church and tradition had dogmas that said, this is reality, this is the truth, that's the truth, and your opinions and your reasoning and your thinking about it don't matter at all, right? But Descartes said, wait a second, the one thing that I know beyond the shadow of a doubt is my own mind, right? I am in the epistemological center of my universe. I am. I think, therefore I am. I'm conscious. I'm the center of my knowledge world, my epistemological universe. It's right in the middle. Martin Luther did a similar thing, right? When he said, the church shouldn't be telling me how to read the Bible. I can read it myself. I don't need an intermediary, right? This is similar to Descartes. I can think for myself. I can figure it out. And that's what science and mathematics are. I can figure this out. There are ways that a smart mind, reasoning carefully, can figure things out. So I'll briefly run through, not all of them, but just a sketch of the rest of the meditations. In meditation 3, what Descartes tries to do is then build on that foundation. And he says, well, you know what? He wants to believe in science, which uses the senses in ways that are mathematically measurable. Science is all about math. And so, but then he says, but I have to really get rid of that evil demon then. So I want to be able to trust those things that science and math tell me, because those are clear and distinct. They seem clearly and distinctly true, right? Now, how do I believe them? I've got the ground floor, which is my own consciousness. I think, therefore I am. Now I want it to be the case that clear and distinct ideas are true, because then math and science become clear and distinct ideas, right? He says, so I have to prove that God exists. That's meditation 3, where Descartes tries to argue. He gives several arguments, at least a few. I forget the exact number. It depends on how you slice them, to prove that God exists. They're not so great, they're not so bad, but the problem with all of them is that they fail Descartes' own method of doubt, because they can be doubted, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most philosophers. Meditation 4, Descartes tries to explain away why God could be perfect, but we can make errors. That was the thing that invited the evil demon into the discussion, where he says something like, God gave us the perfect ability to understand the distinction between things that appear clearly and distinctly true, because our minds are built in such a way that we must believe those, things that are like A equals A, and things that are clearly and distinctly false. We can't believe those, like a circle is a triangle, right? We can't believe things like that, contradictions, right? And then the third category is things that are neither clear nor distinct, so we're uncertain about them. And what Descartes said is, God gave us the ability to withhold our judgment. Wherever we make a mistake, it's in the gray zone when we don't know, but we act as if we do, right? So God gave us perfect minds. We recognize what's clearly true. We recognize what's clearly false. And the things that are not clear, we're intelligent enough to know not to form opinions about them, but we do anyway. That's on us, not on God. Right? In Meditations 5 and 6, try to resolve the mind-body problem in ways in which just kind of bring math and science back into the picture. And I'll say one other thing about Descartes with mathematics. He had a dream which was a kind of eureka for him, where he thought he broke a code. You know, the Rosetta Stone, I don't know if you've heard of it, but you know the language program that you can download to learn foreign languages is called Rosetta Stone. It's called that because a famous archaeologist named Rosetta found a stone that had 3 ancient languages. One was Egyptian hieroglyphics, all on the same page. It was like 3 sections of a page. Let's just say hieroglyphics, and then maybe like Sumerian, and then like Aramaic, whatever. But whatever the other 2 languages were, we knew what those languages were, and they both said the same thing. So we realized, the first thing in Egyptian is saying the same thing. And that stone enabled Egyptologists to finally break the code of Egyptian hieroglyphics and figure out what it meant. And now we know what all the symbols in the pyramids mean, right? That's a code breaker, the Rosetta Stone. Descartes had a dream, ironically, Mr. Dream argument, had a dream where it was kind of like a code breaker. Now, Galileo had said once, famously, the language of mathematics, a language of nature rather, is mathematics. Because he measured the speed of sound and the speed of light with these interesting experiments and stuff like that, right? Really quick, you hear the sound of thunder, and when you see lightning, it's not always the same. And Galileo had the intuition that the closer the lightning was, the quicker that you heard the thunder. So he thought light traveled faster than sound. And so he set up these experiments to prove it, and he did. Came pretty close. So, like, that's just a couple of examples. One example, really, of how mathematics tells you about nature, because they're the numbers. You can measure and get exact quantities, and nature is repetitive in mathematical ways. It observes mathematical rules, right? So Descartes' dream, it felt to him like a Rosetta Stone. He didn't use that terminology, but he spoke about it in the same way, where you know what a graph looks like with the x-axis and the y-axis. I always forget which is which, but you know, you could take like a curved line and plot it up across, you know, and then you've got numbers going up here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and across 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so you get like one up, 1 over, 2 up, 3 over, you know, whatever. And you could plot and give numbers, so you could give a numeric interpretation of a sloppy line, right? So it was all the, like, I mean, geometry, you can do simple things with straight lines and perfect circles and triangles and things that are uniform, but these are ununiform things, and all of nature is ununiform, or a lot of it is ununiform. And when Descartes figured out how to plot and graph things, these things are named after him, Cartesian coordinates, x, y, and whatnot, right? After his Latin name, Cartesius. His academics picked Latin names because they learned everything in Latin. Latin was the academic language, also the language in the church. So Descartes thought that he had code breaker. He broke the language of nature by being able to put mathematics to sloppy shapes, right? So there's that connection, ironically, once again, between mathematics and good epistemology, right, for Descartes. So what he says in the 6th meditation is related to his dream. The dream is what changed his life, by the way. After he got out of college, he was disappointed with what he learned. He thought it was a lot of folklore and nonsense blended together with a little bit of knowledge. And he traveled. He did what he called the University of Life, where he was drinking a lot and dueling, literally challenging people to duels to make money, and he had some life, and then he had these dreams, this series of dreams, 3 crazy dreams one night. He had that dream, and another one of the dreams was where he had a manuscript containing the truth, and he was banging on the door of a church to try to bring it in, and a demon was pulling him back, right? So Descartes wrote his meditations and dedicated them to the church to bring this knowledge to the church, interestingly enough. And the evil demon appears in his book, but he thinks he's defeated the evil demon in the meditation 3 when he proves that God exists. But now jumping back to the Cartesian coordinates, the graphing, which makes computer graphics possible, by the way. We owe the matrix and all of that stuff that we're worried about in the future, I think, to Descartes. Ironically, what he said was, okay, he thinks that in meditation 5, by the time he's gotten to meditation 5, he's done an awful lot to establish the distinction between the mind and the body, that the body is spatially coordinated and can be graphed, the physical world, whereas the mind is not. It's not divisible, it's not spatial, right? But then meditation 6, he says, one thing that's about how you can know that you're awake, once he's established that you can trust things that are clear and distinct, because God wouldn't make us, if God is good as opposed to a demon, he wouldn't give us minds that saw clear and distinct things as true and then just couldn't help but believe them, and clear and distinct things that are false, is clearly and distinctly false, that we can't believe them. A good God wouldn't make our minds like that and be deceiving us. Right? And he says deception is some kind of an imperfection. God, by definition, is perfect. There's all these interesting arguments. But in any event, at the end, he thinks he's established this house of knowledge on the foundation of I think, therefore I am, which, by the way, in Latin, cogito, I think, from cogitar, to think, ergo, therefore, sum, I am, from the verb to be. Right? Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. So he's got that at the foundation. He's got God exists, therefore clear and distinct ideas are true. Mathematics is clear and distinct. Science is clear and distinct. And then at the end, right, with the mind and the body, the physical world, that's what science measures with mathematics. We can at least know all the parts of nature that are mathematical. And then think of the Cartesian coordinates on the graph. He says, if you could plot out from where you were, from the moment you woke up, through time and space, throughout the course of your day, till when you get back to your bed at night, if there are no gaps in there and you can make out a perfectly linear progression through space and time without any gaps, right? The complexity of that alone is concrete evidence that you're awake, because that doesn't happen when you're dreaming, right? A. B. God wouldn't deceive us in that way. I don't know how convincing that is, but that's what he tries to do. All right. I think we've thought enough. I hope you've thought enough. So welcome to the crazy world of philosophy.